when you envision what your job is going to be like, you don't really like get what it's going to be like in the situations that you'll get into. So the adrenaline part comes later, and that's actually, in a sense, it's kind of like a drug that you have to try and avoid. Doing dangerous stuff, I'm doing things that are very confrontational, but I don't think anybody really stops to think about the bravery that it takes for a journalist in the counties to go and report about something going wrong in the county, especially when it has to do with like a governor.
It's never touched the curiosity to do like something investigative about perhaps the existence of an occult in Kenya. All this, we have Freemasons, we have all these rumors and things we hear about.
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. No, I haven't like given it serious thought. And I think it's partly because of the answer that I gave. I don't know my own faith well enough to then now start to interrogate the other side.
William Ruto. The lights got a bit brighter.
Hey.
Every Other Time with Eric, episode 10. Hey, today we have a treat for you, man. We've actually, first of all, made it to episode 10. Thank you all for this, for being on board with this journey. It's been quite a pleasure, man. You guys are not ready, man. Today we have a special guest, a legend in the game for many reasons. Someone I've been watching since I was young, a fellow school alumni, a legend in the media space, Kenya and beyond, a truth advocate, someone who's rubbed shoulders and stepped on toes. John Allan Namu is in the house, man. How are you doing, man?
I'm good, Eric. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Man, what a pleasure to have you on board.
Asante.
I was just telling you behind the scenes, man. Man, dreams do come alive. I used to fantasize some of these conversations before the fact.
Really?
Like I've imagined, I'm like, hey, one day I'm going to pod with John. One day I'm going to end here. Here he is in the flesh, man.
Yeah. No, it's a pleasure to meet you, and thanks a lot for inviting me. I'm humbled that I'm one of the people that you'd wanted to host.
You are a legend in the game, man.
I don't know about legend, but I've been here long enough. Yeah.
What's with legends and trying to be humble, man?
No, it's not humility. I mean, the word legend is heavy, man. It's a very, very heavy thing. So let me give you an example of people who I consider legends. Malcolm X, for instance.
Yeah.
If you look at the arc of his story, it's legendary. Like you couldn't have scripted something like that. Someone else would be. I'm just naming American ones. Denzel.
Yeah.
Right, like just in the acting game, those are the goats for me.
I agree with you on those two for sure.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Denzel fan.
Me too, man. I've watched, I think, almost every movie that he's produced since like the early 90s.
Favorite? Training Day?
Well, Training Day is up there. Training Day is up there for two reasons. The scene when he's like, we're in the office, baby, and then he switches on the car, and then Still Dre plays.
Yes.
That's the best
and
scene.
And Ethan Hawke is looking at him
and he's like, yeah, that's my favorite scene in that movie. Obviously, but actually, when he played Reuben Carter, the boxer,
I've seen that.
I don't know if you've watched it. I can't remember the title of the movie, but it's based on a true story of this boxer who gets jailed for a long time, and then the journey is about him being released. How Denzel prepared for that role, and how like he almost when he does stuff like even with Malcolm X, even with Malcolm X, he doesn't look like Malcolm. But the way he embodies...
He brought it out so well.
You're like, damn.
You actually feel like you got a glimpse of it.
Exactly. And so for me, that's legendary. So I'm still on my journey. So legend is a bit of a heavy...
Legend in the making?
Well, I hope so.
So investigative journalism, man. Careers are unique, and you picked a unique one. Yeah. Sometimes people will ask me why flying. I always knew. It was always a passion of mine. I come from a family of aviators. But investigative journalism, is it the adrenaline? Is it altruism? like the greater good? Is it, or what is it about investigative journalism? How did you get into that?
Well, okay, so the adrenaline comes later because you when you envision what your job is going to be like, you don't really like get what it's going to be like in the situations that you'll get into. So the adrenaline part comes later, and that's actually, in a sense, it's kind of like a drug that you have to try and avoid because when you become a junkie for that kind of stuff, you can get into very, very dicey, very dangerous situations. And then you tend to forget that as a journalist, being a journalist in and of itself is no savior from a bullet, no savior from anything. Yes, it grants you privilege, it grants you access. But in situations where there's real danger, it doesn't guarantee you anything, So that's one thing that over the course of my career, you kind of have to start becoming aware of. But in terms of the altruism, so altruism, again, you're picking heavy words. Altruism, I don't know whether this fits as being altruistic, but, I mean, and I've said this part of my story before. Something happened like with my family, and then it became public. And it affected me in such a way where I felt like the press really misreported the facts. And so for me, it was really important to go out there and tell people stories and tell them well. I think that for me was like the only time that I really thought about, okay, if I ever get a chance to do this, I'm going to do it like this. I didn't know that it meant journalism. At that point in time, I was still kind of deciding between journalism and international relations. Actually, I'd picked IR. But I remember that as being like a definitive moment for me. And it's because of, how I felt about how I was being depicted. Or not I, but, family members were being depicted in the press. And, from there, it kind of just builds. Then, I'm sure when you got into flying, there were things that you recognized about your career. You're like, I don't really like this. I want to be a different kind of pilot. So as I progressed, that's kind of how now, you start to ruminate over stuff, and then you're like, okay, this is the direction that I want to go. Fortunately for me, it happened quite early. So like 1 or 2 years in, then I was like, yeah, it's feature stories, investigative stuff. And I love storytelling. So it had to be a combination of something where you're doing something that's in the public interest, but you also get to do it in a way that I feel is kind of artful, which is hopefully what my body of work represents.
It does in many ways. And it's so interesting. You talk about how the perception of one's choice of career starts to evolve as you get in it. For me, just even doing a podcast, I entered aviation and I saw how one track it can be. And I quickly saw that perhaps I just don't want to just identify as this. I want to also diversify myself because I have time, I have resources. So I identify with that. But how quickly does, in investigative journalism, how quickly do you get encounters with fearful situations? Because when I think back to the days of Jichopevu, you went deep from the time for the guy for the cars, the car trackers.
Yeah.
Then there was the narcotics.
Yeah.
Then there was, at that point, at my youthful age, I remember thinking, at some point, anyone could take you out. And we live in an ecosystem where, even as recently as 2 months ago, people were abducted.
Yeah.
Would you say it's notoriety, like the fact that you're well known, that has kept you even alive?
In our younger days, it was the fact that we worked for a big brand. So KTN was the brand, news in terms of broadcast journalism. So I think that protected us a lot. Over time, I guess in a sense you could use the word notoriety, but I think that prominence of your name constantly being associated with one type of journalism then now helps you evade some of the worst consequences of what can happen. If you cross the wrong person, it hasn't always, helped, but certainly And this is something that I've been saying now this for a number of years. So yeah, you might think that I'm, doing dangerous stuff. I'm doing things that are very confrontational. But I don't think anybody really stops to think about the bravery that it takes for a journalist in the counties to go and report about something going wrong in the county, especially when it has to do with like a governor. Power there, you're so close. It's so local that all of the journalists are well known by the the reporting by the governing elite. If you do something wrong, you can get blackballed. And by wrong, I mean if you do your job and it rubs people the wrong way, you can get blackballed at best. You can get fired. There are some journalists who've been fired simply for doing their jobs. And there are others who've been, tortured. There are others who've escaped death. Like, I don't know if you know the story of Sharon Otieno.
Yes.
You remember the young lady who was killed?
Yes.
Now, she was in a car with a journalist. That's the guy who escaped. And the reason that we know about what happened is because he was able to escape, right? He was a county journalist. There are so many of those cases where, because there's so much power being expressed and exposed at that level, then, it becomes very, very difficult for those guys to operate. So yes, for me, the kind of access that I've been able to get over time, and the fact that for a time in my career, I was associated both with a big brand and a type of journalism that was very, I guess, titillating for guys to watch, then it's helped me sort of like evade the worst of it. But the truth of the matter is, every time I've done a story, I've tried as much as possible to be truthful and also to be fair. Like, even if I find out bad stuff about you, Eric, I'll come and I'll ask you. I'll tell you, yo, this is what I found. This is the evidence. What's your response? Giving people that opportunity to respond. I mean, it's a cornerstone principle of journalism. But in terms of security, I think it's also a cornerstone principle that you are seen to be coming to the table with clean hands and saying, this is the evidence that I've got. This is what I intend to report. This is your opportunity to respond. Giving people that opportunity is super important. And that's kept me safe a long time.
Wow. And what's the elite or the powerful people? What's their typical response to that kind of gentlemanship? Is it an offer of perhaps a golden handshake? Are we? Is it? Sometimes I feel like we need to give Kenya some credit in that. In as much as we're not a perfect democracy, we're not like some of our African counterparts, where even just at the hint of knowledge of any form of scandal, people disappear. Yeah. So in our context, is it typically a golden handshake that's the first offer? Is it usually threats? What has been your experience across the board? What's usually the initial response?
Interestingly, none of those. The first more typical response is that guys just ignore you. They say, this guy is just a rabble rouser, is doing nothing. When they figure out that it's serious, then they start to make their approaches. And their approaches will very rarely be direct. Like, come, let's talk, me and you. Very, very rarely. They'll always use some sort of go-between. And those go-betweens will usually come from your profession or something adjacent to journalism. And it'll be someone that you should trust or trust, so that they can then now come and tell you, this guy is not a bad guy. Just come and talk to him. Yeah. Just listen to what he has. There's nothing that's binding. Just listen to what the guy has to say. The threats come from, typically what I've seen is that threats come from very insecure people. Very insecure people who either are insecure by the fact that what you will do and expose them will lead to very serious consequences for them, or just insecure people in and of themselves who want to be seen a certain way, and your reporting is going to ruin that. I'll give you an example. I'll leave the name out, but this is a person who whose name was mentioned quite prominently around 2006, 2007, thereabouts, around the Anglo leasing scandal. And years later, actually, so like maybe about 1 or 2 years ago, we came across some information that was tied to him. And so in so doing, I've typed up my right of response letter, I've sent it to him, and then ensues a WhatsApp conversation that is incredibly like the bitterness.
Yes.
Oh man, the guy accused me of everything under the sun.
Gun emojis.
Man, this I was about to call him this nigga, but this guy like went in. He's like, I've always known you're a hack. You're a hatchet man. You and Moha, this is what you used to do. You guys, I don't know, I'm going to sue you from here to Kingdom. I'm like, my guy, see, look, the questions are there. It's very clear. I'm speaking about a specific thing. So just answer the questions. He never did, Fortunately for him, his Nini just occupied maybe like 1 or 2 sentences in the story. And it was really just, I found out this information about you. I just want to verify whether it's true, whether it's not. So typically, that's the kind of person who's the most dangerous.
Have you ever felt fearful? And fearful, how do you compartmentalize that? Because you go home and you have to be, I know you're a father,
Yeah.
you're a husband, you're a leader of your own home.
Yeah.
And how do you not bring your work home? And maybe not directly fear, maybe just some anxiety, some angst about a specific thing. How do you compartmentalize that?
Not well, I have to say. Not very well. And I think I've been spared a lot of the hard work that comes with actually having to compartmentalize or leave your work at home, because my wife was in the media. And so she kind of gets the work, and we've worked together both at KTN as well as at Africa Uncensored before she left to do her own thing. So she kind of gets what the job entails. What has been, I guess not, well, I mean, it's been challenging, is to explain to our kids why certain things have to change around the home, why you can't be like, our son is going to be, he's 15 now, he's going to be 16. And we've been clear, no social media. Because obviously it has
absolutely like zero?
Well, not zero, but none of the big platforms that all of their friends are on. And for us, it's both it's not that we don't trust him enough to handle the risks that come with being on social media. It's that sometimes inadvertently, you can let something slip in terms of information that then endangers the entire family. And so it's that plus, social media is its own demon when it comes to kids and how impressionable they are. Think about when we were growing up, how much of a challenge TV was, just TV.
It had to be regulated, moderated.
Vibaya sana. Yeah. Now imagine a TV that is serving you the content that you want 24/7 as a young person, and there's Wi-Fi in the house, etc. You go everywhere, there's Wi-Fi, you're always connecting and talking. Imagine what impact that has on a person's ability to just form a sense of control around things that you should be able to control. That's tough for even young kids.
Yeah.
So our decision has been, no, look, you'll be able to experience it vicariously through, YouTube shorts, kidogo, so you kind of get what's going on. But like Snapchat, Instagram, the Twitter, my daughter came and told me, Twitter's for old people. Why would I want to be there? But all of these you kind of have to be careful about. So now just circling back to the question we're asking about fear and danger and compartmentalizing, I think that's one instance in which we've thought very clearly through that. In terms of bringing my work home, the how I've resorted to it is just being very open and just explaining to the kids and to my wife what's happening, what's going on. Talking about your day before you set out, so like she knows that I'm here. And it sounds very mundane, but it's those kinds of things that if ever I was to disappear, she knows the last place I was at was every other time with Eric,
Yeah.
right? And then now she can build a timeline. But it's things like those that really help, and in developing and just normalizing those kinds of protocols in your life, so that they're not unusual. That makes it easier.
Not to sound blockbusterish, but do you have a kill switch? Like,
If I had one, would I be talking about it here? Or rather, if I had one, should I be talking about it on a podcast? So let's leave that to the imagination.
Fair
of
enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So being an investigative journalist and someone who does feature stories, does that limit what you can do in your free time in terms of, I'll give you an example. Let me use myself, because I'm a recovery ambassador. You know, I'm recovering from alcoholism. I've given my story on a public platform. I share about it openly. It also helps me in terms of my own accountability to the public.
Yeah.
I can't just be spotted at happy hour, knocking them back. It'll just be a matter of time before someone spots me.
And they'll be like, this guy's off the wagon.
He's off the wagon again. So being that you're an investigative journalist, and a lot of the times you touch on people's quote unquote immorality, like, does that also limit you in terms of what you can do or what you can be seen to do in public?
That's a really good question. And for the former part of my career, I found myself very restricted, feeling very restricted in the things that I want to do. You know, you're a young guy. You want to go and just have like a rager, just paint the town all shades of. And it's not to say that I didn't do that, you know. But certainly when you start to occupy this position where people kind of see you as being this guy who exposes other people's wrongdoing, you kind of have to start being careful about what you do in private. And here's where I think I've been very fortunate in this way. First of all, my upbringing was such that we always were. My mom has this expression, fly the Namu flag high.
Yes.
You know, anytime you're out there, fly the Namu flag high. And so that was a thing for us. Like when you're outside, you know that you're not just representing yourself, but also when you're alone, you kind of have to be aware that, you know, sometimes the most embarrassing things about yourself can come out from the most, you know, unsuspecting or unexpected corners. So it's two things. It's that, and then I have to say I married well. I married very well. If you know anybody who knows my wife, they'll tell you one of maybe a few things about her. A, she is forthright, like she doesn't bullshit, like she doesn't beat about it. By the way, can we curse on
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she doesn't bullshit. She doesn't beat around about the bushes when it comes to things that she feels about. So she's very, very forthright. For her, honesty, lying is almost unforgivable. I mean, many of the fights that we've had have been because of my dishonesty in one way or another. And so growing into that person who then now values honesty just above not just career-wise, but generally speaking, has been very, very helpful for me. So I don't want to credit myself for that. That's really something that I've had to grow into. And then another fortunate thing is that even like when I was playing rugby, even when I was like a single dude, I never was like one of those guys who'd now like be like, for instance, pints. I take a drink now and then. I've gone through all of the things that everybody goes through when you're drinking, having some embarrassing nights. But it's never really been like a thing for me. I find socializing in that way with people who are not in my circle very awkward. I can be a very awkward person when it comes to social interactions, and you might find that I'm the sort of person who will talk shop as a way of socializing. You know, I guess that's one of the things.
Is that a high IQ thing?
I don't know. I don't think I'm a high IQ guy. Like
Most high IQ people don't think they are.
I don't think I am at all. I my wife certainly doesn't.
I love that you've touched on marriage, because we're living in a time where marriage is being vilified, especially by the younger generation.
Yeah.
I think empirically it's good for when men talk, because I'm also someone who's benefited off the fruits of a good marriage, and so is my crew here. We all always talk about the net positive is so high.
It is.
Of having a wife who supports and actually keeps you accountable.
Yeah.
You know, some people they bastardize the institution because they don't want to be accountable. When if people are to actually do a cost benefit analysis, man, the net positive is undeniable,
And more so for men.
especially for us.
And more so for men. I couldn't agree more. It's so, Eric, how old are you now?
I am turning 34 in November.
All right. So I'm 41. So you get to your 40s, and this is a really important time for men, because around the time when you're in your 40s and going forward, maybe 40 to 45, what you'll recognize is you are no longer if you are a sportsman or you're something like that, you're no longer in the shape that you once were. If you're in business or career and that's been your focus, you recognize that you're very near the peak of your abilities. And one of a few things will happen. You'll recognize that either you've made it to where you want, or you're almost there, or like things haven't worked out, right? And it's at that point in time that men kind of fall into almost like a second cycle of, that 20s kind of like wilding out behavior.
Yes.
Because they're trying to reconcile themselves with this idea that they are A, mortal, and B, perhaps not as achieved as they'd want to be, because achievement is a very important thing for men. And the people who survive that phase, largely, I'm not saying this, 100%, but the people who survive that phase are people who either are in good marriages or have a very strong social network of people that they can be accountable to. So accountability is like a really important word here. And so I have a very small circle of friends, very, very small. But I'd say of all of the people in my life who I've ever had to be accountable to, my wife has taught me that lesson. And so it aside from all of the stuff that comes with marriage, and marriage is not easy.
It's not. Yeah.
It's not, man. It's not a bed of roses.
It's not a cakewalk, yeah.
It's, and I'm so glad that you brought it up. It's that question of accountability. Accountability is so important, because when you're accountable, then you can start to set a bar for yourself of what I can achieve, what I know kindani, these things to make.
And there's a level of focus.
Exactly.
And men innately were wired to take such crazy risks.
Yeah.
Be it financial, be it I'm stopping my career, let me try this. You know? So a woman is very pragmatic. She'll always reel you in and be like, hey,
calm down.
Abu, let's first think about this carefully, So I think that's so important to touch on, especially in today's age. I feel like a lot of young men are being misled about marriage and the idea of it. So to see someone successful also talk about it in a positive light is amazing. It's
interesting that you define me as successful. I know this is going to sound like fake humble, but I really don't think I'm quite there yet. In some ways, yes.
What's your measure of success? What's success to you?
Freedom.
Financial,
mental, social freedom. Financially, I'm not there yet. Socially, I'd say I've made the right kind of connections. And then just mentally, I think I still have some work to do. So I'm not yet free. My vision of why I'm smiling is that I'm trying to decide whether I should tell you this, because it sounds stupid and it sounds kind of trite and silly, but my vision of what freedom looks like to me is being on a beach somewhere with nothing else to do but to let's rake in the seaweed that rolls in every day, go back to my house, my beach house, and sit down, have a coffee, look out into the ocean, and kind of like be satisfied with where I'm at. And I've had this like vision many times, and I don't know whether it's the God voice or what have you, but it rings back and it says, clean your beach. Like, and for me, how I've taken it is like prepare myself for that point in my life. And for me, what that looks like is ridding myself of these very human desires and wants, and truly being focused on continually improving myself and continually improving the circumstances around me. Selfishly, one of the things that I'd wish were to happen in my life is that when I die, that people will turn around and say, here lies a man among men. That's very important to me. It's important to me because I've had that experience with a few men who I admire, like I really admire. And that statement, I know I can say of maybe 2 or 3 men who are currently in my life. And I'd want that to be said by someone who I never know or will meet. There lies a man among men. The way I'd say it for Malcolm X.
From the outside looking in, as someone who's met you for the first time but knows knows the work you've done, I'd actually say you're well on your way in terms of that. And I'm not saying that to brown nose you in any way. I from the outside, I think many people would agree. You said something interesting. You said you were curious if it's the God voice. What's your take on God? What's your stand? What do you believe? What do you not believe?
I believe that there is a God purely because of the concept of intelligent design. I find it mind-boggling that we have a world that works in such, if you're looking just purely at nature, that works in such balance that there isn't something behind that creates it, right? Or someone, some being. I also believe in God because I've seen God work in my life. You know, I constantly, when I'm asked about my beliefs, I constantly say that I'm not very tied to dogma, and the political reason that people give when they say something like that is that dogma is made by men, and therefore it's just the formula for worship, right? And formulas are different. That's partly true. The real reason is that I just have been lazy about sort of like studying the dogma to be able to question it enough. I still have questions about, my faith and my religion. There are certain big questions that I ask myself. In fact, we were having this very same discussion with my mzee not too long ago. And I was surprised to learn that he, like me, has these very same questions. But for me, it's undeniable that there is a God, that he exists, that he lives and works through us. And it is us who, in emulating him, and I use him advisedly because even the concept of gender, when you're thinking of a being like that, is very silly to think about, But this is just my way of expressing it. Even him, you know, there can't be a reason beyond that I can fathom that the world exists the way that it does. But to that, you then ask yourself a question, and it's a question many people have asked. If there is a God, if God exists, why are there children who are being blown apart in Gaza right now? Why would there be children in Russia who would die in the way that they did? Why so much suffering? You know, there's this line that DMX has in that song, "Slipped or fallen and can't get up." You know,
Moving
to live,
song.
yeah. To live is to suffer, right? No, is it to survive is to suffer? To live is to find meaning in the suffering. That's kind of like one of the core questions of being a human being. Why do we suffer? What's the meaning of suffering? And I think beyond that, it will be an even more eloquent answer for, is there a God?
Wow, that's profound. When it comes to nature, my career always reminds me. Sometimes, the sun is setting or the sun is rising, and you have a view through the cockpit. And sometimes I go through seasons of doubt. I share that with my guys here all the time, where I start questioning everything about faith. Like, no, everything is cause and effect. I can trace how I got here.
Yeah.
And sometimes nature just reminds you, wait a minute, this cannot just be
Exactly
a mistake. There's a divine element about it. And about the why do people suffer? I think sometimes we try think like God as human beings. So I think there's a much bigger picture happening that we're not privy to. And we try explain it within our human context.
Exactly.
But time will tell, of course. The ultimate test will come when we cross over.
When we die, it's it's one of those questions that I have to say, when I've reflected upon it, I've reflected deeply, but I don't reflect upon it often, because you're kind of like in the process of living, sometimes you forget to kind of step back. But that thing about being part of a bigger picture is coincidentally also why I think that there's a God. You said something in that statement that everything is cause and effect, right? But if you were to trace a line of how you got to here, how many decisions independent of you that you don't even know about were taken, or how many events took place that got you to that place that you don't even know about, and how all of them kind of work in concert to create the person that you are. Even your journey in alcoholism, right?
There's many reasons why I shouldn't be here.
Exactly.
So many things I survived. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, I didn't even realize the level of danger that I was existing in.
Exactly.
But on the flip side, we always ask about God, but we also have, most people who believe in a God believe that there is the other side or the dark side, And as an investigative journalist, especially in the last 15 or so years, there's been so much curiosity about the occult from in the West, here and beyond. If you go on TikTok nowadays, every third scroll is about so and so is Illuminati, end times. Look at the symbolism. It's never touched your curiosity to do like something investigative about perhaps the existence of an occult in Kenya. All this, we have Freemasons, we have all these rumors and things we hear about.
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. No, I haven't given it serious thought. And I think it's partly because of the answer that I gave. I don't know my own faith well enough to then now start to interrogate the other side. But I do believe that there is another side, and I, for me, and it's not to target you, but sometimes there's this thing that people say about this man must be part of some sort of organization, etc. But what I found is that largely people are just evil because they want to be evil. Like, how do you explain this young lady who was burnt and died, the athlete
In
from Uganda? How do you explain that? Right?
Pure evil.
Yeah, because how driven are you to be able to punish someone in such an insane way, right? How do you explain child abuse? You know, how do you explain those kinds of things? Those people might not even know about the existence of a cult. But there are some people who are just wired in such a way where the suffering of others is an event like any other. It's like breathing. When it comes to, I'd say that now there's more sort of like intent and intelligence in terms of like forming these kinds of things is in organized crime. And by that extension, how organized crime impacts itself on government, right? That for me is where I've seen this occult that people talk about. It's some of the features of of the occult would be, you know, loyalty to a specific purpose, to a specific goal. And in government and, you know, or in leadership, I've seen that this commitment to power for power's sake is something that has driven people to organize in ways that you wouldn't even believe, you know. And for me, that's where the true evil lies, in that you can project yourself on people in such a way that you don't care about what the consequences of what you do are. But I mean, to your question about investigating the occult, actually, now that I think about it, there's been an invitation to do that from someone who I coincidentally bumped into the other day, but not perhaps at the level that you're talking about. Maybe it's something that's on the cards for me.
I would love to see that. We're coming off the bat of the past 3 months was quite a eventful time in our nation. We actually got to see things happen that have never happened before. We had what people would say was an organic movement from the ground up that led to as far as youth breaching parliament and calling for the resignation of a president.
Yeah.
People gathering in a digital town square. I think Twitter has become like a digital town square where people can gather in the hundreds of thousands to express their anger or displeasure with the powers that be. And 2.5 months later, there seems to be a lull, and things have gone back to normal, quote unquote. So in your estimation, because you are quite vocal during the movement, is this a lull? Is this the calm before the storm? Was the movement a chance for the people to express themselves and then go back to their status quo? Or were there foreign players? Because you're a well-connected guy. I always think that some of these things, because the world nowadays is very interconnected. We have a Cold War happening. Russia, the States, and all the allies are being puppeteered. So what do you think is happening post-movement? What do you think was the movement really about? Was it what we saw is what we got, or were the undertones far-reaching?
I think, okay, so maybe let me start with my reasons for being more vocal than your average journalist when it came to what happened with Maandamano. I think it was the result of seeing so many missed opportunities over the course of my career. Now it's coming to 20 years, right? So many missed opportunities in a country with such great potential. And usually that missed opportunity always has some sort of like interconnection with the impact of the way we look at leadership in this country. I'd say that this movement could have happened in Kibaki's time, it could have happened in Uhuru's time, but it happened now because, again, there are certain things that have taken place over time that I think led us to this moment that people don't recognize particularly. One of them is free education. the fact that we have so many people who are educated, in my view, was a factor, because education allows you to raise your ambitions as an individual, allows you to broaden your horizons, as a person, and say, I want more for myself. Secondly, think about the generation that was on the streets. These are people who grew up without the baggage of Moi and years past. In fact, they don't even know who that guy is, But for them, their own struggle today is important, because they see, and which is another factor, the fact that they can see how other people across the world are living, that they're being given the short end of the stick. That's really important, You're telling a young person that their choices in life are limited, and you're going to live this very meager, ordinary existence simply because there are people who are in positions of power and privilege that do not want you to advance. That's an important thing, because then now you look around the world and you see people who are your age doing incredible stuff, and you're like, why not me?
A very unlikely source said something that I resonated with. Steve Mbogo said, and many people can say many things about him, but there's one thing he said. He said, you're telling people with Lamborghini dreams that you're gonna give them Django jobs.
Yep.
And yet they can, just as you said,
exactly,
they can see the possibilities.
I mean, look, I have my own problems with Steve Mbogo, but even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yes.
And on that, he was right. You cannot curtail the ambitions of a generation that has grown up in the age of the internet, that can see what kind of opportunities exist. In fact, some of them are even already benefiting from some of those opportunities. Then you come back, because of the selfishness of people in government, etc. If you're thinking specifically about debt, you're telling them that you're the one who's going to pay the bill for my own champagne lifestyle, and you must do it. And if you don't do it, there's no otherwise,
Yes.
And then the alternatives that you're being given are digital jobs that are akin to digital slavery.
And and what is this? What is a digital hub? It's so, I feel like the term digital hub is like a 1980s version of, there's some computers there, go and type, money comes out. It's so ambiguous.
Exactly. I'd compare it to ugali. The most ambiguous, tasteless meal that, yes, it tastes good with other things, but define ugali. What is ugali? It's water, it's flour, it's a meal, inakushibisha, but you're not really getting anything from it. And I think that lack of specificity when it comes to government is something that has been used for many, many generations.
Kenyans,
kazi kwa vijana as an example. Do you know what kazi kwa vijana was?
Guys being given brooms and
slashers. How are you telling a guy, okay, kazi kwa vijana, we are going to pump billions of shillings in giving you jobs, and then when unaambiwa shika slasher, go and in your environment. Fine, there's a place for that kind of work, and it's not good to look down on any kind of work, but you cannot continue to curtail the ambitions of young people. So, just back to your question, that's why for me, it was important to just say, look, there's a moment here that we need to recognize, and it for me was the perfect opportunity for everybody, including those in leadership, to say, here's our road to Damascus, let us take it. I think if it was taken, we'd be in a very different situation now.
We have what many people say, we have a legendary intelligence agencies in Kenya.
Yeah.
We've been touted to be almost like Israelis, yes. But why did it seem like the powers that be got caught flat-footed? Is it a thing of sitting so far up in the castle that you never think that the people can actually revolt? Or is it a wrong information being passed up?
I don't think it was wrong information. I don't think so. Because, look, you need to... I don't want to say too much about this because I'm doing something right now. But you need to look back and look at the events that built up to that moment. There were a lot of signs But you see, sometimes when you're at the center of power, it's very hard to look at the margins and think about them as being, it's the same way that innovation kind of like upends businesses. The most innovative idea will often start to be recognized at the margins of that business. And by the time that it is now occupying the place or competing for that sort of centrality, it's too late for the guys who are in the center, And I think that's kind of what happened, where they thought that this is such a far-off problem that the politics in Kenya, in as much as we are saying we are changing it and it's becoming issue-based, is so far away, so far removed from us that it'll never affect us. In some ways they were right, but in many ways, and I think crucially in the way that it mattered when it came to the finance bill, I think they were wrong.
Was there a foreign hand once the movement started?
I don't think so. My 2 cents, there possibly was. I can't dismiss the possibility, because if we know anything about foreign influence, is that they never let a good crisis go to waste, right? But what was the opportunity for them, right, in causing chaos, etc.? And what did they stand to gain by ensuring that there was instability in an important country, a country as important as Kenya? Sometimes, the simple answer is really the truest one, that you have a society of people with raised consciousness about their environment and the things that they want, that want to live lives of dignity and are being prevented from doing so. And not just being prevented like, in a very distant way, but in a very personal way, right? And that was the finance bill. Why did you see people taking time out of their day to translate the finance bill into different languages? Or do you have influencers starting to actually read about these kinds of things? It's because the pain was personal, right? And that personal pain connected to so many other struggles that then the movement kind of emerged. And then to answer the second part of your question as to whether there's a lull, yes, there is one. But in the same way that 2007 changed Kenya, the 25th of June changed Kenya. That's my belief.
I believe so.
Yeah. We are not the same country that we were before the 25th. And I'm not even counting the 18th. Before the 25th and after the 25th, we are a completely different country. It'll express itself in different ways. But if people pay attention to some of the things that have been happening since, then you'll recognize that Kenya is no longer the same.
We have a guy like Morara who's spilling the beans left, right, center.
Yeah.
Do you think the faceless leaderlessness has ended up not working in our favor? Because at some point, I had Khalif Cairo on, also a controversial guy, but he's not a fool. He said something like, at some point there should have been a caucus of sorts, someone, and he was not talking about himself. He was saying, at some point, the way the system is set up, it cannot be entirely faceless or leaderless forever. Do you think that towards the end and the infighting, I feel like part of the tactics, the powers that be used was to create disunity amongst the perceived heads of the movement, maybe by way of paying some guys off, discouraging some guys, abducting some guys, instilling fear. And then now they just ended up sort of
diluting the power of the movement.
Yes.
I think that a few things are true about the movement and the Mandamano. Before the 25th, there was a very clear target. Very clear, right? And that target was then now adjacent to some of the other problems that we are facing, which, for instance, poor leadership, right? So when people were talking about Ruto must go, there were those who, were saying Ruto must go. But I think it was more like representative of a system of governance that people don't agree with, right? And fixing that takes a lot more than protesting on the street. It takes the actual work of figuring out how do we then address ourselves to the people who are holding power. David Ndee, for all of his sins, and all of the people that disagree with him, says something that I think is important, and he's been repeating it. Politics is a contact sport, right? And what the Maandamano represented was a moment of moral clarity, which I think is more important than even the politics. But also, like, if you were to think about the objective, if the objective was to present a formation that would then replace the leadership that is currently in, it also represented that moment. And you can't go into the government and be faceless and tribeless. There has to be a leader. There has to be someone who then would be the focal point for these kinds of things. Now, people might not agree with me, but if that was the objective, for the protest, I think it was important that the tribelessness was like a key rallying point, the facelessness, because what it said is that this problem doesn't belong to one person. And I think that for me is what I got from it. This problem doesn't belong to one person. It's all of us. It's a collective issue.
Across tribe, across class, across age.
Exactly. So the problems of misgovernance, the problems of poverty, the problems of corruption cannot be there's no face on that. It's all of us. And that for me was why I think that was an important thing at that point in time. But if there's anything we need to look back to and learn about our own journey to here, is every stage requires different tools, right? If you were to think about it even in terms of sport, the strategy that you begin with is not the strategy that you end with, right? You probably want to be able to, like, if you're playing, like in terms of rugby, if you're playing guys who are very strong in the forwards, etc., what you want to do is to make sure that they are like spread out across the field, so that because those strong guys usually aren't able to make their way across the park. That's a strategy. Once you've been able to achieve that and you've been able to weaken that base, then now you return to addressing them directly. So there's strategy in that kind of thing. But how do you collect the kind of people that you need to be part of that caucus? Currently in Kenya's political system, it's done in a very specific way. It's done through political parties. It's done through caucusing. It's done through using the instruments in the constitution that allow for those caucuses to happen. Now, if that's the direction, then that kind of needs to happen, because people aren't going to vote for tribeless X or faceless Y on the ballot, right? People are going to vote for people.
A person, yes.
And this now connects to my earlier point, is that the most important thing for me about Maandamano was the moment of moral clarity that the country was able to have about the direction in which it is headed. That's more important, because then you now get people like the Kebasos who are frustrated enough about something to take time out of their lives to go actually show you. It's not just Morara. Look at all of the people who've been doing this kind of civic education post Maandamano. There are many guys. There are very many guys. It is, in my view, because they had that moment of moral reawakening and saying, no, I can't live in a country like this. That's the more important thing. From there, then you will get a crop of people who really are committed to something, then possibly, X, Y, and Z.
You know what I fear? I fear, because I believe in Kenya elections are primarily about perception. And I don't believe in the process literally, that votes were counted and John won 50, Eric had 30, John won. I think there's a bit of that. Tied into that is how many votes was John able to steal versus Eric. Tied into that was public perception. Is it believable that John could have actually won? All those things where our democracy has reached at this point in time. I feel that's what elections are. And of course, with time, they'll keep getting better and more refined to the point where literally a numbers game where so-and-so, this many votes were cast, so-and-so won. my fear is that in the coming elections in 2027 is that someone will try and claim they won without the perception. And I feel like that can be a very dangerous place for the country. Because even in the last election, it was plausible either way.
Yeah.
If the guy who came second won, it was okay. The guy it was either or.
Yeah.
But let's say Wajakoya won. It would have been
Like that, there's no way.
There's no way. So now is at that level, what tactics do these guys use? Because our president has shown us time and time again that he's able. Like he convinced a good number of guys last time, despite what people call deep state, that he was able to actually beat that whole system. And do you think in 3 years he can twist the perception again and convince?
I think he's doing it even now. I think, love him or hate him, what my belief that President Ruto's greatest strength is his ability to organize at the grassroots level and to talk directly to the grassroots. That was his superpower in the election past, that he connected with people at the grassroots and was able to create that perception and that belief that he is a candidate of choice. Now he has basically state resources at his disposal to be able to do this consistently for 3 years, right? We fundraised, or rather members of the public fundraised for Morara Kebaso.
Yes.
How long before that kind of, that kind of motivation around him, just using him as an example, peters out, right? So it's a factor of A, sheer will, on Ruto's part to be able to create that perception. B, resources, like he has the resources to be able to do it. And C, people talk about our politicians as being, not professional, not learned, have no experience or education. But being in politics is education in itself. This guy has been around since the 90s. What kind of lessons do you think that he's learned about how the state operates that he can then apply? This is why these next few years are very important in terms of how a force that identifies itself with the need for change organizes over time. It's important that they start to learn the lessons that others who have come before them have learned, and then shape themselves into the sort of team or what have you that can then form the kind of contest that's required. And it's not for a shortage of people who can do it, right? But here's one thing now to answer your question about how the system works currently. And I was given this example by a friend of mine who contested in politics but lost. He's now doing his own thing. You see, like as an example in Nairobi, you don't just have to be popular, like uende ukauze sura na watu wakupende. Hapana. You have to be connected to that gang leader in some informal settlement somewhere, who is going to organize his guys to then now be your squad when it comes to fighting, literal fighting. You have to be connected to that tenderpreneur who can say, I'm going to give you 10 cars for, for your campaign, and I'll fuel them. You have to be connected to the women who are organizing in chamas and that sort of thing. So it's both organizing from the point of view of creating some sort of monopoly of violence, where when you go down to the ground, people feel you, and that feeling sometimes is often expressed in violence. Look at every politician from Sakaja to Babu
They
to
have
anybody,
goons.
they all have goons. They all have these gangs of guys who you would not want to be seen with at 7 p.m., because you know what will go down,
Yeah.
right? And they also have this other side to them, the cleaner, more clean cut, wave at the people sort of side, because they recognize that in Kenyan politics especially, one must have resources, one must have access to or a monopoly of violence, one must have perception, in terms of popularity. And that guarantees you an opportunity at least to be able to bargain for power. That's how I look at it.
Is there any goodwill? Have you interacted with any of these guys? And I ask this in that you would want to imagine as a population that the people you're voting for have a semblance of goodwill in terms of, I want to leave a positive mark on during my tenure, irrespective of whatever other motives I may have. Maybe it's to build wealth. But I feel like this new cohort of leaders lack goodwill. Is there any goodwill left?
I'd say in some quarters, yes. I've interacted with some leaders who I'd say definitely have goodwill. I can give one or two examples. I'd say Crystal Asige was one person who, when she spoke, I think I felt this person actually has an interest in being able to do that. Richard Onyonka as another, who, at least from the point of view of speaking about the things that are, affecting government, has goodwill enough to want to see a better Kenya. So those politicians exist even now within the system, right? But to use an expression from Malcolm X, to be a straight man in a crooked game or a straight woman in a crooked game is to be in a very difficult and untenable position, right? The problem with Kenya is not so much the goodwill to change. It's the fact that at a systemic level, the system doesn't allow for you to change. So then what needs to happen to the system itself is a question we need to ask, right? Are we in a system that cannot allow for us to be able to progress in the way that we want? And if we are, how do we change it? What sort of people do we need? The people come after the question has been answered, because you will have a person with good intentions, great goodwill, even some sort of power to be able to change things. But as long as the system is set up in a certain way, the same way this table, you can't turn this table into a chair without re-engineering it. You must be ambitious enough to think that you can re-engineer that, and to have not just the goodwill, but the clarity to want to change and know that it's not just you who's going to do it. And it probably won't even happen in your tenure or in your lifetime, but that you must commit yourself to something above and beyond you. But goodwill is erased also by everyday concerns.
Yeah.
People forget that those guys eat, they have families, they have ambitions, personal ambitions of their own. And if the system works for them better than it does for other people, to the advantage of their family, to the advantage of all of their dreams and aspirations,
it's hard to convince them otherwise.
Very hard, very hard.
I want to shift gears. So you went from formal employment where you enjoyed some of the protections of a large conglomerate to starting Africa Uncensored. Now where you're, I'm assuming you're the boss and you have board members maybe, and you're in charge of your own operation. What was that transition like, and how has the journey been so far?
It was sort of like the natural thing to do from where I'd reached at KTN. The journey was like any startup. It wasn't easy. You recognize that you have deficiencies in or gaps, I should call them gaps in knowledge that you didn't even know that you had, right? So my assumption was that we'd go, we do good stories and we send them out to the public, and the public would be like, we love these stories so much, here's our money and you can survive. Or then we'd, be able to create a strong enough base to then now, attract advertising that then but doesn't interfere with the editorial work. But there were many, many lessons that I learned earlier on about my own sort of like gaps that I tried to fill with trying to, read, this is the time that I went and did my master's. But also recognizing that, man, I can't do this alone. I need a team. I need people who can help me in this. Both for the selfish reason that, yes, I can't do it alone and want to achieve this, but for the more unselfish reason that if I was to succeed and succeed alone, then that's not really success. Because if I was to die, or if I was to walk away and the state of journalism hasn't changed somewhat, I'm not saying I'm going to change everything, where there are people who are not adept at investigative journalism that I interacted with, who I could have influenced in some way or given or opened a door for or something, then that's not really change. And so that's also kind of like how my own sort of vision broadened from wanting to do the stories that I wanted to do to wanting to influence the careers of the people who I'm in touch with so that they can do what it is that they want to do, to wanting to impact the field so that the field itself can then be representative of what Kenya's greatest aspirations are in terms of journalism, investigations, and storytelling. So I'm somewhere on that journey. But yeah, I mean, that's to answer like in broad strokes.
And how do you balance that with the bottom line? Because the bottom line is a real thing.
Yeah. How do I balance that? So number one, I think the thing about being able to get the right kind of advice around the decisions that you make is important, because then that helps save quite a bit of the resources that you have at your disposal. Number two, and I've said this many times before, Africa Uncensored gets its resources both from commercial, like activities like doing documentaries for folks and stuff like that, commissioned work like what we were doing with Maisha Magic and Showmax for the last door, as well.
Awesome, by the way. I actually have, I don't know if I'm allowed to plug, but I actually literally got Showmax literally for that.
Hey,
the teasers on YouTube, that was a genius stroke where you put something on YouTube that has someone reeled in, and then now you have to go to the paywall.
that is very good. That is very good advertising for season 3. So yeah, if you want to see season 3, tell those guys.
You must check it out. As in, I actually watched a YouTube clip, and I was like, "Where's the next?" Then I was
then you were directed to.
And I actually quickly paid, and I've had Showmax since.
That's good. Then the genius belongs to them. Us guys, we just told the story, right? But I guess, where was I? So I was talking about like the different ways in which we also fundraise, right? So from grant makers, who are interested in the work that we do, from a value perspective, then now I've been able to support the work that we do, because we're a public interest investigative journalism company first, and then everything that we've grown into has become now as a result of our journey. So balancing that was tough. What people don't know about when you get a grant is that a very small percentage of that grant goes to salaries, goes to running the business. A much, much bigger part of that grant goes to the activities that you propose, that this is what I want to do with that money. And it can be very difficult to survive on that, So I've had to take loans, to especially post-COVID, during COVID and post, to be able to keep the company afloat. I've had to, invest my own personal, resources to ensure that things kind of like go the way they're supposed to. There were times that I thought that it wasn't worth it. It was, eating into my own mental well-being, into the stability of my home. At some point, I had to change schools for my kids, our kids, I should say. So the journey,
entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's not a straight line. It's not a straight line.
Are you open to ideas? Like, Can someone outside your ecosystem
Yeah.
propose like an idea for a documentary?
Yeah, they do so all the time. And where we're moving to is a place of now partnerships. I'm really looking for people who I can partner with, who kind of like share the same vision. Not like in terms of buying into the business or anything. I'm just talking editorially purely. So like if you've got a good story, and you think that it has this, potential, etc., have a conversation about how we can either fundraise for that story, how we can pay to make sure that that story becomes achievable. Because, and a friend pointed this out to me recently, is that once you build the platform based on the work that you've done, what you then do is attract people who also like kind of see the same kind of thing as you. And what your job is now to become is a platform for them. So I think that's the direction in which we're going to grow, God willing.
The reason I ask is because I have an idea I'd like to discuss with you off air.
Okay.
But before we go, who does John watch? First of all, which investigative journalist do you look up to and you're like, man, this guy or this lady,
I mean, there have been many across the years, and I don't typically look at investigative journalists lately. I mean, wow, that's a
or who
good
does
question.
the best? We have the CBSs, we have the Netflix. Who does the best docs?
So for explainer journalism, I'd say one of the guys who I've started to watch quite recently is some American guy called Johnny Harris. He's got a very interesting.
I know.
You know Johnny Harris, yeah. So I like the way he tells his stories. I like the topics that he picks, especially. So he's not like a one-trick pony, In terms of storytelling, there's a YouTube page. Why is it escaping me now? It's called Studio Binder. That's just got tips on storytelling that's more around fiction. I love the Untold series on Netflix. I love that series.
That's pretty good as well.
Sports and the storytelling behind it is really good. Another series that I really liked on Netflix was Remastered, which was really, really good. Just in terms of the way the stories unfold. In terms of investigative reporting, I have to say some of the work that, let's see, OCCRP, which is the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, have done around the world is really good. There's, let's see.
What happened to the Roskemps of this world? What happened to Roskemp?
I don't know. I wonder what happened to him. I remember watching him quite a bit, actually. I remember when he came to Kenya, he did the Mungiki thing. That was really interesting. I think there have been more and more people who kind of embody that kind of vision. So, I mean, I guess to answer your question, there's not one person. There's like a mix of people. And what I typically look for is, yes, you've got the information, right? You've got the gold. But can you tell me a story about that will keep me interested in this very dense information that you have, that will then keep me all the way till the end? Anybody who can do that, I'd say, has the perfect combination of both investigative skills and storytelling that keep audiences engaged, because that's the most important thing at the end.
You did that very well with many, especially the ones attached to terror, the mall, Dusit, Westgate. The storytelling was fantastic. And of course, facts attached to the storytelling.
Yeah.
Which brings me to another question. You guys were a dynamic duo. Are you still in contact with Moha?
Yeah, very much so. Like we talk now and again. Yeah, I'm still in contact with him. You see, our friendship wasn't just tied to journalism. We were friends just because we liked each other as friends, right? So like, he was a groomsman at my wedding. So
wow.
It's a long friendship, right? I guess to preempt a question that you'd probably ask or people have asked me before is, do I agree with the career that he's taken? and let me put it this way. You can't expect to change politics without engaging in politics, right? So on that level, I think what he did was good for him. Do I agree with some of the allegiances that he's then now made? I mean, he knows this and I know this. I don't.
Do you discuss it? Or?
We do. We talk about it now and again. And the good thing about having a friend like that is that you can express your displeasure with certain things that they do, the same way he expresses displeasure with the things that I do that he doesn't agree with. And that's what friendship is. Friendship isn't just supporting people blindly. It's telling people, look, I think you're making the wrong decision here. I think you're making the right one here. But the details of that are for me and him to know, right? I think for members of the public who might be judgmental of the fact that I'm friends with a politician need to remember that he wasn't always a politician. And even if he is one, if I connect to a person on a personal level, then what they do, I guess, would have some bearing, obviously, on what kind of friendship we have with them. But up until this point, I feel like he's still a good person.
Well said. To close out, I'm going to name some names, and you just say the first word that comes to mind. Okay. I'm not going to keep it. I'm going to keep it both local and international.
Okay.
So I'll start with a cliche one. Right? Donald Trump.
Misinformation.
Okay. Fair
Disinformation, enough. Actually, I should say.
Disinformation. Okay. Vladimir Putin.
Well, that's an interesting one. I'd say, I can't say one word. I'd say we need to understand what's happening there more. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. William Ruto. The lights got a bit brighter.
Hey. Again, a phrase. I meant to say this earlier in the interview. I'll put it this way. No lesson is wasted.
Jesus.
Rebel.
Wow, I would not have expected that. And I kind of understand already. Guy way ahead of his time in a time where, wow, interesting. Interesting. Okay, I'll leave it at that. I think the lights got a bit bright.
Yeah, man. Where you asked me about somewhere.
It's been Every Other Time with Eric, episode 10. John Allan Namu, man. What a privilege, man.
What a pleasure. Thank you.
I do look forward to having you again.
I love conversations like these, by the way.
Thank you so
really
much.
Rich. I enjoyed that.
Thank you so much. Yeah. We're making history here at Every Other Time with Eric. Thank you all for being aboard the journey so far. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. We're going to have many more riveting conversations like this. Maybe you can say something to my fans. You can look in this camera.
Every Other Time with Eric is definitely a podcast worth listening to, worth watching. If you've got the time, I've enjoyed my time here. I think that if every conversation is as rich as the one that we've had, then you definitely should subscribe. Let me plug my own people as well.
Go ahead. Also
subscribe to Africa Uncensored on YouTube, on X, on Instagram, and look out for the work that we're doing. But for purposes of this conversation, Every Other Time with Eric. Definitely one of the better podcasts I've been on.
Thank you. Every Other Time. It's a wrap. Episode 10.